What's at the center of extreme inequality? To answer this question, we need to understand how our economy's industry structure has changed over the last several generations. During the 1950s and 60s, challenged by government and labor unions' power, large employers began to take care of their so-called corporate family. Industry giants ensured that all their workers at steady work were well paid with health and retirement benefits. They set the standard for their modest number of regional suppliers, and their workers' middle-class wages ensured neighborhood businesses thrived. Yet these giants still largely excluded African Americans, Latinos, women, and others. The few they employed were relegated to what were thought of as menial jobs. During the 50s and 60s, then, prosperity was more equitably shared, though the giants' exclusion of those deemed less worthy ensured significant inequality persisted. The corporate family, already under strain, began to come apart in the 1960s and 70s. In the 60s, large employers hired temp workers to fill in and then replace women clerical workers. In the 70s, as large employers struggled with economic downturns, they cut costs by contracting out services done by African Americans and others deemed less worthy. Through the 60s and 70s, then, the giants learned they could preserve their profits and power by exiling many of those they relied on to prosper from the corporate family. During the 1970s and 80s, as challenging economic times persisted, the giants now turned their back on the white male working class. Egged on by a new breed of financial elites, in service of large shareholders, quoting business consultants, the giants transformed the corporate family into so-called lean corporations. The giants created wage tiers, dividing workplaces between the well and poorly paid. They slashed benefits. They closed factories, moving work across the country and then overseas. The lean corporations abandoned struggling communities across our industrial heartlands. Beginning in the 1980s, inequality began to rise again. The vaunted ideal of the corporate family was replaced by a cold adherence to core competencies. A new wave of tech firms, led by highly educated, overwhelmingly white men, focused on what they did best and contracted out broad swaths of work they deemed less worthy. Advantaged by government policies, these firms wielded significant market power, and as a result, they were able to take for themselves a greater share of the prosperity generated across their vast product ecosystems. By the 2000s, prosperity as commonly measured returned, yet it was marred by extreme inequality. The vast majority of people simply did not have the market power they needed to keep up with the economy. The most prosperous of firms were comprised of a relatively modest number of well-paid employees who relied on a vast ecosystem of workers who were less well-paid and bore the brunt of the economy's instability. This is the story today, not just of the tech industry. In industry after industry, dominant firms are generating extreme inequality. To tackle extreme inequality, we need to recognize how it began. Industry giants excluded African Americans, Latinos, women, and others they deemed less worthy. Then, lean corporations, the new tech elite, and dominant firms across our industries followed the giants' example and excluded the rest of us. Today, to ensure truly shared prosperity, we need to create markets that include everyone, and to do that, we need to break down the excessive power of the few. This has been a video podcast of the Leap Forward Project. Thanks for listening, everybody.